Hello and welcome. This is Business Incorporated coming to you live from our Lagos studios here in Nigeria. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago. On the show today, South Africa's PMI rises even as the country prepares for general election on Wednesday. And Zimbabwe extends central bank governor's term by another 5 years. Plus, Tunisia's annual inflation eases to 6.9% in April, the first time since February. Well, let's get the show started with the markets, and starting off here on the African continent, major markets here started the new week negative as all indices were down at intraday. The EGX 30 in Egypt shared 2.17%, while the JSE index was down 1.76%. The NSE was down 0.22%. Kenya closed on Friday negative. In the Middle East, Saudi Arabia stock market fell sharply to hit a near 8-month low at intraday as oil prices weighed on its financials and petrochemical shares were, while other major Gulf markets lead in early trading. Saudi's index slumped to 1.73%, with Sarah Group dropping 4.7% after the travel operator posted a 40% drop in its first quarter net profit, citing competitive pricing and higher costs. Qatar's blue chip index lost 1.58%, pressured by its financial stocks. Doha Bank and Qatar Fuel fell 3.3% and 2.4%. The Dubai index lost 0.70%, weighed down by Islamic insurer Dow Takaful, falling 3.7%, and Islamic Arab Insurance Corporation sliding 1%. Abu Dhabi's index slipped 1.54%, with property developer RAC Properties shedding 1.8% after it reported an 84% slump in first quarter net profit. In Europe, markets moved sharply lower today in the morning after President Donald Trump said the U.S. would hike tariffs on goods from China. Well, let's get details of that and more from my colleague in Frankfurt, Conrad Wilson. Hello, Conrad. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Chimmy. It's not a very bright day here on the trading floor, but it's great to be back on Channels TV.
Oh, just wondering what the problem is. Anyway, it's a beautiful and bright day here in Lagos. Let's get started now. Shortly before the resumption of trade talks between the U.S. and China, President Donald Trump made a surprise announcement. Tariffs on goods from China would be raised dramatically from this Friday. Now, this caused panic in Asia stock markets. What's the mood like in Europe right now?
The mood is not very good, Jimmy, and you already said it. The German market, the European markets in general, plunged immediately after trading started this morning here in Frankfurt. You can't see it, I think, really, because the plunge is right here. It plunged 2%, the German share index, DAX, that is, and since then, the index has been hovering on that line, more or less unchanged, but still, it's around about 2% down. Those tweets by the U.S. president that he might increase, the amount of tariffs or the total amount, of the tariffs on Chinese imports came as a total surprise to most people on the financial markets. Up until this weekend, most of the people there had believed that there's reason to be optimistic. Both sides, the Chinese and the American negotiators, had continuously repeated how well the negotiations were going, how much of hope there was that an agreement could be found. But now those tweets by Donald Trump make it pretty clear that he wants to continue, the disruptive game, the contentious game, that he really is not willing to, indicate together with the Chinese that, his administration is willing to find a common legal framework for how to do trade. And that, of course, makes many people here in Europe nervous as well, as the European Union is facing negotiations with the United States. And we've seen recently those discussions about state aid for the plane makers, Airbus and Boeing. We've seen this conflict about this Nord Stream gas pipeline in the Baltic Sea. see where always the United States has shown that it is really willing to push its America First agenda. So, of course, everyone here is nervous again.
And elections are brewing in the EU, and ahead of the elections, Germany's private banks are calling for a pro-Europe vote. What banks are we talking about here, and what exactly are they saying?
Well, we are talking about all the big names: Deutsche Bank, Commerzbank, UniCredit, JP Morgan, also a few of the smaller but very renowned banks like the private bank here in Frankfurt, von Metzler. They all came out together with the Association of German Private Banks with a statement urging voters here to go to the election in the first place. And then what they want is voters not to vote for protectionist and populist parties. The banks are saying that in the future we'll need more Europe, not less, if we want to tackle the big problems like, globalization, climate change, migration, etc. And it really has to be said, this is a first. Usually the banks are very reluctant to give political endorsements, to, give tips what to think and what to make in terms of political votes. And also remember how often we have talked about the banks complaining about the European Union, about too much regulation, about the negative impact of the European Central Bank and its monetary policy. Now this statement makes clear that there's also a more general way to look at Europe, and that overall, despite all the whining and complaining of usual days, it's really worth fighting for Europe. Of course, many people here I talk to have doubts whether this appeal to the voters will really work. The reputation of the banks is not the best after the financial crisis, and there are, of course, people out there who might say, if the banks want me to vote pro-Europe, I might consider voting against it.
Anyway, Cora, let's look at some of the corporate news there. And it seems Boeing has not heard the last of it from that crash. Now, more revelation on the Boeing 737 MAX plane. It's been alleged that Boeing knew about problems with the 737 MAX the year before Lion Air crashed and did nothing about them. Now, is the market punishing Boeing for this?
Yes, the share price of Boeing is down around about 3% right now here in Frankfurt, because also meanwhile it's not only alleged that Boeing knew about this device before the Lion Air plane crashed last October, but Boeing itself said that it knew about this device, failed to communicate this to the FAA. Now the FAA itself says a bit contradictory statements. It says that it's not considering that device to make the airplane, the 737 MAX, unsafe per se, but it also says that it might have helped to know about that device before. Now, if we look at the bigger picture, if you look at the Boeing share price compared to before the Lion Air crash, I have to say it's still trading higher now than before that crash. But more and more analysts are getting nervous and are getting concerns. We have the US Justice Department conducting a criminal investigation in Boeing. Then there's also scrutiny by congressional committees and the Transportation Department Inspector General. So this adding to the growing numbers of lawsuits by families of the dead passengers means that there is really a rising risk for the company to face a major problem. Remember what happened to Volkswagen and the diesel emissions. At the beginning they said, oh, this is not a big problem, but they ended up paying a lot of money. Remember Bayer and the glyphosate, this chemical lawsuit, those lawsuits in the United States. Bayer saying, well, we are on the right side, it's not going to be a problem, but it's getting expensive, more and more expensive day by day and by the hour. This might really become a big problem for Boeing.
Well, the week has just started, so let's continue to keep a tab on some of those developments coming out there from the European space. Thank you for your time today.